the calls are continuing for a ceasefire in the war between Hamas and Israel in Gaza. The cumulative death toll is beyond 10,000 now. Close to 11,000 people have been killed, 1,400 of them killed in the 7th of October attacks, and disproportionately 9,500 people, many of them children, killed in Gaza. There's also been calls for the opening of humanitarian channels to Gaza. We're speaking now to Jonathan Conricus, who is the international spokesperson for the Israeli Defense Force. Jonathan, I have to ask you, does the IDF keep a record on the loss of civilian life in Gaza?
Good morning. I hope you can hear me well. The whole issue of civilians is, I think rightfully so, a very important topic. To answer your question, no, we do not have a log. It is impossible, and I don't think that any military, while fighting, has such a log. Those are things that the military is able to produce after the fighting, once names are established. What we are doing, however, is to try to get civilians out of the battle space. And for the last 2 weeks and 2 days, we have been asking and actually pleading with Palestinian civilians to go south, away from northern Gaza, which is the main focus of our operations, to go south to relative safety, where there is humanitarian aid, food, water, and medical supplies, and where there's a humanitarian zone.
You've called on Gazans to move south, but yet there are the reports that just this weekend that convoys of ambulances were targeted by Israeli rockets. We have reports on people making their way down the corridors out of Gaza City have been targeted by Israeli rocket fire. What is the point of calling and warning on people to go south if they are still being targeted by Israeli rocket fire?
Yes, you say that as if that is the truth. I would advise caution when basing what you say on Palestinian reports. I can say categorically, have not attacked a single convoy of Palestinian civilians making their way south. There have been 2 separate incidents. Both of them, if you've seen video of it, look very, very suspicious. They don't look like airstrikes and they don't look like rocket strikes. They look like either IEDs or close-range execution done by Hamas. I can say categorically, have of course not struck any civilian convoys going south, because it is our interest to allow a free flow. What we have shown, and we have provided proof on Twitter and to the international media, is roadblocks erected by Hamas preventing Palestinians from evacuating to the south because Hamas wants them to stay in the north. Now, you addressed ambulances. There is an unfortunate violation of humanitarian law and the law of armed conflict by Hamas. Sorry, and we have shown proof about it, both from 2014 and from this conflict now, this war, that Hamas combatants make use of ambulances in the battlefield, not only to provide medical care, which is what they're allowed to do, but to transport combatants and weapons from locations, and they're effectively used as combat vehicles.
Jonathan, you say that there has not been any targeting of civilians, but of the 9,500 people and fatalities that have been reported by the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, saying that 3,900 children, 2,430 women, 67%, that's the number that makes up the total number of fatalities, 572 elderly people who have been killed over the last 29 days. We can say largely, almost in its entirety, that these are not Hamas fighters, but still 3,900 children have been killed in the last 29 days.
Right. So those figures are based on information that Hamas provides. The UN doesn't collect those numbers by themselves. They are based on the Hamas-controlled so-called Gaza Health Ministry. And you'll find one age group and gender group missing? Where are the 17 to 35-year-old men? How they are a very big part of the population in Gaza, but they are mysteriously missing from the list of casualties, and it appears as if they have been all consumed by the ground, and they are not in the list of people
Are you
killed.
then
Only
denying then the almost daily traditional and social media reports and visuals coming of on a daily basis, children being and their bodies being sought through the rubble, people crowding at hospitals trying to find loved ones, parents trying to dig their children out of the rubble, 3,900 children. And yes, the United Nations says that they have not been able to independently confirm
indeed
these
they have
numbers,
not been, and
but they have
I
used the
think
numbers that have provided by other humanitarian
by Hamas,
officers,
yes, by Hamas,
and as
it should
well
be
by
said,
the Israeli government
by
as
Hamas.
well.
No, they are using. We haven't issued any numbers about Palestinian casualties, right? The only ones that are issuing numbers about Palestinian casualties are the Palestinians, sadly. And even when the UN sadly takes numbers that Hamas approves and disseminates, exactly for you to say what you've now been saying at length about the number of civilians and women and elderly people allegedly killed, where's the age group of the combatants? Where are they? This in itself should be
are you denying? Is it a flat out denial from the IDF that the 67% of people who have been killed so far in Gaza have been women and
according
children?
to Hamas? No, so I am not denying that there have been children casualties. Unfortunately, we see that there are children casualties and there's women that were killed as well. Let's speak about intent. There is no intent on behalf of the IDF to kill civilians. We have done documented efforts in order to get civilians out of the combat zone, unlike Hamas, which are trying to keep them in. And this is proven and documented, and whether people want to believe or are intellectually brave enough to actually accept it, this is proof. We have been trying for more than 2 weeks to get civilians out of the combat zone because we understand that it is an area where Hamas has all of its infrastructure underneath the civilians. They're hiding in tunnels. And again, if you don't want to take my word for it, listen to Mustafa Abu Marzouk. He's the head of the Hamas political bureau. He was asked on RT, Russia Today, why don't you let civilians go down in the tunnels? And he says, oh no, the tunnels are for us, for Hamas. That's where we fight. They aren't for the civilians. That's only for us. And the civilians should be taken care of by the UN, not our business and not our responsibility. Now, instead of asking me about civilian casualties, let's focus on those who govern the Gaza Strip and have been governing the Gaza Strip since 2007, and that's Hamas. Where has international aid gone to? What are the purposes of building
Where has
tunnel
international
networks
aid
underneath
gone to?
Gaza?
Before the start of this war, there would be 500 daily trucks of aid entering through Egypt. That's now trickled to 9 trucks a day. That's where the aid has gone to, Jonathan.
No, and I think you are misrepresenting things for your listeners. Actually, it's more trucks per day that were coming in through Israel, not through the Egyptians. More trucks per day were coming in through Israel, through a crossing that is called Kerem Shalom. I've been there on the ground and I've seen the trucks every day, and I know the number. And yes, of course, during peacetime or during when there was no significant fighting, Israel was facilitating a lot of aid into Gaza. But I think it is totally irrelevant what happened before October the 7th, before Hamas launched this attack on Israel. And if you really care about civilians, then let's talk about intentional killing of civilians. Let's talk about intentional taking hostage of civilians.
And we can say the events of 7th October was a terrible attack by Hamas, and under the Geneva Convention could be considered a war crime. I accept that. But going to some of the other numbers that have come through, 16,000 homes destroyed in Gaza. There's an argument for an act of domicide. Domicide, the destruction of one's sense of home, one's sense of place. 16,000 homes destroyed. What then happens after this war? Who's going to help rebuild Gaza? And would the destruction of a place that one considers home, does that then not fuel the disgruntlement and the discontent going further, Jonathan?
Yes, but let's look at the root cause here. 2007, Hamas took power over Gaza. They have been governing since. What have they been doing with the very generous international aid that has been pouring into Gaza? Have they been building a future for themselves? Have they been building schools, roads, and an economic infrastructure? No, they've been building a powerful war machine of rockets and missiles and a city under a city, and they've enslaved the local population. And what they've also done, and I don't know if you've been to Gaza, I have. If you stroll around Gaza, you won't find a single sign on any building that says, "Welcome to the Hamas headquarters of military operations," or "Welcome to the Hamas Center for Research and Development of Rockets and Projectiles." It doesn't exist. They all hide within the civilian population. And when you quote the destruction of property, that is sad. And I agree, losing your home is not something that I would wish anybody. But the fact is that Hamas is to blame for this as well, because they hide and embed their military infrastructure within
which
the
we've had
civilian.
international humanitarian organizations, doctors who've worked in the Al-Shifa hospital saying, I've been given, and we spoke to a Norwegian doctor last week, says, I've been given free reign of Al-Shifa hospital. I've been in basements, I've been through corridors. I've not seen one Hamas militant as purported to call Al-Shifa hospital base. Is there military installations? Yeah. We have people who say they are not, people who have been working there every day for years, saying they've absolutely seen nothing.
You know what I suggest? Let's do this. Let's revisit this in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. By that time, I think much more will be clear. And if that Norwegian doctor really is a man of his word, after we will show documented proof of what Hamas has built underneath Shifa, and after we will show bodies of dead Hamas terrorists there, then I'd enjoy having a conversation with that same gentleman and asking him if he's still so certain about the fact that Hamas isn't running Shifa and hasn't made it into a makeshift terrorist headquarters, abusing the special sanctity of that hospital.
Jonathan Conricus, he's a spokesperson for the IDF.